Today, I'll be reading the first part of the conclusion of Joseph Campbell's Primitive Mythology. The conclusion is entitled The Functioning of Myth. Part 1 is the local images and the universal way. What is important, said a white-bearded Hindu pilgrim as the train pulled into Benares, is not the object worshipped, but the depth and sincerity of the worship. And yet, he was getting off at Benares after a long and arduous trip to worship Shiva in his spiritual capital. Two aspects of every ritual tradition are recognized in Indian thought, and they correspond to Adolf Bastian's elementary ideas, elementar Gedanke, and ethnic ideas, Volksgedanke, which we discussed in the opening pages of this book. It will be recalled that according to Bastian, the elementary ideas are never experienced directly in a pure state, abstracted from the locally conditioned ethnic ideas through which they are substantialized. But like the image of man himself, are to be known only by way of the rich variety of their inflections in the panorama of human life. We may therefore think of any myth or rite either as a clue to what may be permanent or universal in human nature, in which case our emphasis will be psychological or perhaps even metaphysical, or on the other hand, as a function of the local scene, the landscape, the history, and the sociology of the folk concerned, in which case our approach will be ethnological or historical. The corresponding Indian terms designating these two aspects of mythology and rite are, respectively, marga, meaning path or way, the path or way to the discovery of the universal, and deshi, of the region, local, or ethnic, the peculiar, sectarian, or historical aspect of any cult, through which it constellates a folk, a nation, or a civilization. I should like to join these two Indian terms to Bastian's, for they not only corroborate his insight, but also suggest, better than the Western terms, the psychological force or way of service of the two aspects of a mythological image. Functioning as a way, mythology and ritual conduce to a transformation of the individual, disengaging him from his local historical conditions and leading him toward some kind of ineffable experience. Functioning as an ethnic idea, on the other hand, the image binds the individual to his family's system of historically conditioned sentiments, activities, and beliefs, as a functioning member of a sociological organism. This antinomy is fundamental to our subject, and every failure to recognize it leads not only to unnecessary argument, but also to a misunderstanding, one way or the other, of the force of the mythological symbol itself, which is precisely to render an experience of the ineffable through the local and concrete, and thus, paradoxically, to amplify the force and appeal of the local forms even while carrying the mind beyond them. The distinctive challenge of mythology lies in its power to effect this dual end, and not to recognize this fact is to miss the whole point and mystery of our science. We have to recognize, therefore, that even where a single deity is worshipped, the varieties of religious experience represented by the worshippers may differ to such an extent that it is only from the most superficial sociological point of view that they can be said to share the same religion. They are held together sociologically by their god or gods, yet psychologically are on different planes. Among the Dakota Indians, we hear, for example, from Paul Radin, what the ordinary man regards as 8 distinct deities, the priest and thinker takes to be aspects of one and the same deity. Comparably, in the contemporary world of cross-cultural communication, where the minds of men, leaping the local fences, can recognize common fields of experience and realization under alien forms, what many priests and sociologists regard as 8 distinct deities, the comparative mythologist and psychologist can take to be aspects of one and the same. The 19th century saint and sage Ramakrishna stressed this psychological as opposed to ethnological orientation when he spoke of the ultimate unity of all religions. A mother prepares dishes to suit the stomachs of her children, he said. Suppose she has 5 children and a fish is brought for the family. She doesn't cook pilau or kalia for all of them. All have not the same power of digestion. She prepares for some a simple stew, but she loves all of her children equally. Do you know what the truth is? He asked, and he answered his own question. God has made different religions to suit different aspirants, times, and countries. All doctrines are only so many paths, but a path is by no means God himself. Indeed, one can reach God if one follows any of the paths with wholehearted devotion. You have no doubt heard the story of the chameleon. A man entered the woods and saw a chameleon on a tree. He reported to his friends, "I have seen a red lizard." He was firmly convinced that it was nothing but red. Another person, after visiting the tree, said, "I have seen a green lizard." He was firmly convinced that it was nothing but green. But the man who lived under the tree said, "What both of you have said is true, but the fact that the creature is sometimes red, sometimes green, sometimes yellow, and sometimes has no color at all." Every student of comparative mythology knows that when the orthodox mind talks and writes of God, the nations go asunder. The deshi, the local, historical, ethical aspect of the cult symbol, is taken with absolute seriousness, and the chameleon is green, not red. Whereas when the mystics talk, no matter what their deshi, their words in a profound sense meet, and the nations too. The names of Shiva, Allah, Buddha, and Christ lose their historical force and come together as adequate pointers of a way, marga, that all must go who would transcend their time-bound, earth-bound faculties and limitations. We have summarized in parts 2 to 4 the history and distribution of the mythological forms according to the plane of interest of history and ethnology. It remains now to indicate very briefly the psychological levels in terms of which symbols are experienced and utilized. And here it will be useful to turn to India for a system of classification. For in India, where an essentially psychological orientation to the forms of myth has prevailed for millenniums in the disciplines of yoga, and a vast number of native and alien cults have existed side by side, a cross-cultural, non-sectarian, syncretic analysis of myth and ritual in psychological terms has yielded a number of very clear, well-defined orders of comparative interpretation, of which we may choose the simplest for our present introductory sketch of a unitary mythological science. We'll stop there for now, and next time we'll read part 2.